Good evening, everyone. Should we get started? Before we do proceed with business this evening, we first need to appoint a chair and vice chair. Do I have any proposers for the chair?
Propose you, Mr. Foster, if that's okay.
Any other proposals? Is that seconded? Seconded by, sorry. That's seconded by Councillor Belinsky-Gelder. All those in favour? Thank you. We then need to appoint a vice chair. I'm more than happy to propose Councillor Alistair Bradley. Do I have a seconder for that? Seena's seconded that. All those in favour? Thank you, everyone. Right. Good evening. Thank you for attending this meeting of the Shared Services Joint Committee this evening on Monday, the 24th of July, 2023. For those that don't know me, my name is Councillor Paul Foster and I'm the chair of this committee. Committee members and members of the public are reminded that this meeting is being recorded and streams live on YouTube. The web link for this can be found on the council's website. I'll begin with some housekeeping. Please can you all ensure that your mobile phones are either switched off or turned on to silent. And can I also ask that any members observing via Teams keep your microphones muted unless you wish to speak. And if you use your raise your hand function online, we'll be able to note that you wish to speak. We're not anticipating a fire alarm, but if the alarm does go off, you should leave the building, be at the exit in the wheel room and wait in the car park to the rear of the building. I'm now going to ask everyone to introduce themselves, starting from my left and go around one by one. Alistair.
Councillor Alistair Bradley, Leader of Chorley Council.
Story Democratic Services Officer.
Aniela Belinsky, South Ribble Borough Council and Deputy Leader.
Councillor Alan Cullens, Chorley Borough Council, Leader of the Opposition.
Councillor Margaret Smith, South Ribble Borough Council.
Councillor Carol Moulton, Leader of the Opposition at South Ribble Borough Council.
Councillor Peter Wilson.
Councillor Hasina Khan, Chorley Council, standing in for Councillor Margaret France.
Good evening, Vicky Willett, Director on South Ribble Council.
And I'm Chris, and I'm Chief Executive of Chorley Council and South Ribble Borough Council.
Thanks, everyone. And online, who's that, Ben, that we have online?
It's Councillor Michelle Brown from Chorley, Chair.
Right, perfect. Thank you, everybody. Right, moving straight on to the agenda. Apologies for absence, Ben.
Just Councillor Margaret France, who's been substituted by Councillor Carr. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of February 2023. I have the minutes of the meeting in front of me. Are there any points of accuracy? And can I propose these minutes for approval? Any questions from anyone?
Can I second those then, Chair, please?
Right, proposed, seconded. Are we accepted? Yeah, thank you. Declarations of interest. If a member has a pecuniary interest, they're requested to leave the meeting completely. The member can rejoin the meeting following the completion of the said item. Does anyone have any interests to declare? No. Okay. Into the main agenda then. Item 4, Shared Services Monitoring Report. Vicky is going to present this.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the main monitoring report for the shared services. It takes you through a number of key areas outlined at point 5. So staffing and budgets, staff satisfaction, progression against the service development objectives. So they're the objectives that are set for each of the shared service areas, and then service performance, and finally the risk review. So the key things to note in terms of this report, there are 2 new areas that have been added in. So this report includes some case studies, which is a new addition. As we go through, we can have a look at those there to illustrate how best practice has been shared between the 2 councils. And then the second addition in this report is property and asset service. So this is the first time that we've reported on property and development, first time that we've reported on performance of property and development with their new service objectives included following the implementation of the joint service earlier this year. So just to quickly run through the key areas, at point 10 we've got an update on overall savings and budgets, and the bullet points outline the splits between each council. I think probably the one to note there is the property services team, which is split 60% Chorley, and 40% South Ribble. Which will change as we start to do more work around major assets and management of new assets that will come on stream in South Ribble, but that's the position as it stands currently. Moving into staff satisfaction. We've recently done the pulse survey with a much better response across both councils. The feedback is given as we run through for each of the phases of shared services. So phase 1 being the corporate services shows general improvement overall, slight decline in happiness, only very slightly, but that we think is probably due to more people indicating neither rather than disagree. So when people complete the survey, they have the option to put neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, and we think there's probably a small number of people impacted the percentage. So we're having a look into those cases and working through them to identify how we can support staff who may feel less happy than previously, but broadly overall really positive high levels of satisfaction retained for phase 1 services, as you can see, broadly above 95% overall. Moving to phase 2, so this is customer services and ICT. Overall, really positive improvements in satisfaction there. So almost 30% improvement in people feeling that they have good knowledge of the service, their role, 15% improvement in skills and knowledge, and then an over 30% improvement in overall happiness compared to the previous survey, which is really positive. That's a result of lots of work that we've been doing in customer services in particular, but also IT around getting staff feedback and different mechanisms for staff to be able to provide their thoughts and input into the development of the service. So that's shown to be working, which is good. And then at point 19, we have the feedback for property and development, which shows overall a positive level of satisfaction, particularly given their point in the change process. And that indicates that we're improving our approach to managing change with services. And we've done lots of work around staff engagement. So that seems to have had a positive outcome in terms of their overall happiness at this point. And we hope to see that continue to improve as they go through the service development process. At point 21, we have some open feedback, which is gathered from staff, just to give you an idea of some of the kind of points that they've picked out in their responses to the pulse survey. Again, key themes in terms of some of the work that we can do around ways of working to help people understand what each other's roles are as they enter into a new shared service. Capacity and making sure that we're filling vacancies and doing that quickly, and we've had some success doing that recently. And then under communication, the importance of continuing to refine our approach to internal communication across shared services and providing different mechanisms and ways of communicating with staff. At point 24, we've got the service level development objectives and progress against those. So each of the bullet points under each of the phases sets out what's been achieved in relation to the objectives, and services will set new objectives as they complete previous ones. As I said before, we've also got some case studies to highlight how best practice has been shared between the two authorities. So examples there including the shared events function being able to share approaches to managing events to improve the activity at both councils, the shared HR hub, which has now been implemented to manage staff interaction, staff self-service. That was originally a South Ribble system, which has now been expanded and implemented across Chorley and leisure services as well. Moving on to the phase 2, there's the shared IT service case study and how we've managed to share best practice in that service, and then finally improve policies and processes around customer services and the new customer charter, which takes best practice from both councils to make sure that we're essentially getting the best of both worlds in our approach to delivering customer services. And then finally, phase 3, new objectives for property and development. So that's the key areas of focus for the Property and Development Service over the next 6 months in terms of bringing together their shared service model, recruiting to key posts. We have a commercial services development group which oversees the progress of that service, including the implementation of new systems, which is referenced in the final bullet point there, around the TechForge system, which will help us to better manage our property records and assets. There's a reference there to performance. We have a number of performance indicators which are included in the appendix for information, and we'll continually look to refine those and make sure that we've got good quality objectives, performance objectives for the services, and then finally an update on risk, and the risk register is included at the appendix as well. 3 risks are identified as medium in relation to impact and likelihood, and 3 are identified as low. We continue to put in controls and actions to mitigate those risks. So I think that's probably everything. Happy to take any questions on any aspects of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. A good report. Thank you. Well presented, and all the key issues covered. Any members have any questions or points they wish to make? Alistair?
Yeah, I think personally I'm glad to see some of the improvements in staff happiness, satisfaction, whatever the phrase is. I know they're a bit patchy in some places, but I think generally the trend has gone the right way, particularly in the customer services and ICT that we've had problems with previously, so that's good. I hope that carries on and goes from strength to strength. And I note the reference in paragraph 22 to other services, which is very difficult to try and do, but I think it's not that far away from what the norm is, for want of a better phrase, and therefore it should be better than the norm, but we need to keep working at that. And I think those case studies are helpful into doing some of that, because they can demonstrate some specific issues, particularly at a time when, as you'll all be aware, we are facing people having pay claims and industrial action mooted and all the rest of it. So at a time when people are probably generally unhappy, to get that improvement, I think is quite good. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alistair. Any other points from anyone? Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, I've got my slightly mischievous head on, so I'm going to ask anyway. On the page 17, we've got the breakdown there, the risks. And it says there, in actions planned, additional capacity is currently being recruited for the customer services and ICT teams. Is that an acknowledgement that the team that we put in place originally was lightweight, as per suggested by this committee?
I'll ask the chief exec in a second, but I don't think it's exactly that, Peter. I think that there were some challenges in some particular areas. We're aware of that, and capability that's been dealt with. But I think for me, it was more about the carrying of the vacant posts, and we know it's acutely difficult to recruit into ICT, Pete.
Yeah, it does mention the vacant posts, but it does say including the vacant posts. So it sounds, the way it's written is to say additional capacity on top of the fact that we're backfilling the vacant posts. Maybe written badly, maybe not, but either way, that looks to me like we've had to take extra people on to deal with the problem that we first predicted when we started out.
Over to Chris.
I think it probably is in the wording. So because we're not going over the capacity that is the established budget for the two services that came out of the Shared Service Steering Committee. And if you recall, for customer services in particular, when we got through to the final agreement of the structures, I think we put in an additional 6 apprentices from the original on the basis of that feedback from the committee. So we are well on with now recruiting to that, including, as Councillor Foster says, to the harder to recruit to posts, which turned out to be around software developers within ICT, which I think is probably fairly well trodden ground in terms of it being quite difficult to recruit to. The wording probably tries to acknowledge that we've had to tweak some of those jobs, particularly in ICT, to make them more attractive and to make them something that we can recruit to. So that is what we have been doing and what we have done, particularly in reference to those software developers. It's within the budget, it's the same number of staff, but we've just slightly changed the roles that we've been advertising to try and attract the market.
Thanks, Chris. Just so you know, Peter, as well, the South Ribble has appointed a cabinet member with the sole responsibility for customer services and ICT, because we recognise the priority and the need for us to make some, I'm trying to use the correct word here, some more significant progress, should we say, in those particular areas. So it is an absolute priority on the South Ribble side as well. Karen, did you wish to say something?
Yes, please. I've got a query on page 21 about the implemented shared terms and conditions across Chorley and South Ribble councils and about the non-shared staff. And it says the programme to move the new terms and conditions is now started. So can you give us any indication of how long it will take to complete? Is it included in the budget? And the comments from the statutory finance officer says there are no financial implications of this, but I assume there will be some cost to the council, and what will it be?
So obviously the comments of the statutory finance officer relate to the decisions and information that's presented in this report. Obviously the move for anyone onto new terms and conditions will potentially and probably be subject to a separate report to each of the individual councils, depending on what it is. So at South Ribble, there has been recently a decision taken around the tweaking the structure of the neighbourhood service in line with the review that's currently being undertaken. The anticipation is that actually each of the reviews as they're undertaken should be delivered within budget. Now, if that isn't possible, we will need to present that report to either both councils or the individual council that is affected. In terms of how long we're expecting the programme to be, I think we said it would be about 18 months, 2 years, and we're about 3 or 4 months into it, and it is running on programme. So we have done economic development neighbourhoods at South Ribble, is probably one of the bigger ones to be done. And we're fairly well on with that, with the anticipation that that'll start to be implemented in early autumn, so September, October time. And that'll be then followed by the next services in the review.
Thanks, Aniela.
Just turn it. Oh, thanks, Chair. What it is there's 2 points. Point 11, it talks about the percentage of staff allocated to Chorley and South Ribble for property development and management, and it looks like it's heavily weighted in favour of Chorley currently. Now, I'm aware of the Leyland Town deal, Jubilee Gardens, and the new asset register, and I know that we're going to increase staffing. I'm just wondering, and I know that Vicky actually said when she spoke that that's going to change. I'm just wondering how much by when, and if it's, and in terms of recruiting for the 2 staff that are going to be inputting into the new asset register, how long that might take.
Good point. Vicky, do you know what I'm assuming it's going to move more towards 50-50, but
yeah, it'll move more towards 50-50. So it might be that of the 2 new posts, one is employed by Chorley and one's employed by South Ribble, and then that starts to then set the balance a bit more then, and we'll be looking at it as on a post by post basis like that. And those 2 posts are being advertised. I think they're out for, if they're not out now, then they will be shortly. So, yeah, we should be appointing to those soon in line with the contract to do the work.
If you recall, when we created shared property, it is about the number and scale of the properties that are owned by each council. So Chorley at the moment has more properties that are directly managed estate by the councils, and so that's what had made the difference in terms of that split. I'd anticipate that as the Leyland Town deal moves along and other projects that have already been agreed by South Ribble Council, like the extra care facility, that will then shift, and is one of the reasons for reporting it through this, so that the committee can challenge us around whether it feels right. or not.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying as well, Chris, that the major projects, for example, Jubilee Gardens, and as you said, the town deal, the additional support that South Ribble needs doesn't get charged into the shared services. There's an external consultancy that provides that, and the individual project picks up that additional cost for that additional resource as well.
Yes.
It does have development in the title, that's all. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Margaret?
Thank you. Just to go back to ICT, I think the last meeting, the February meeting, I think I asked the question of how many vacancies we were carrying at that time. And I think, if I recall, it was either 11 or 12 in a particular area of ICT. Could you tell me how many we have actually recruited to and how many vacancies we're still holding?
We're both looking like this because we can't remember the figures off the top of our. We're both looking like this because we can't remember off the top of our heads what the exact numbers are, but we can confirm it to the committee afterwards. We have been successful in the last few months in recruiting. I don't know where we're up to in terms of people starting in post, but we'll confirm to the committee.
Any questions, anybody? Councillor Walton?
Thank you, Chair. Just a query on page 35. It's about the telephone calls, the abandoned and answered telephone calls. It's quite misleading because it doesn't break it down into the two councils, and I appreciate that it's now probably on the same system. But I still think that 3 minutes, 5 seconds, or February to May, is this still an acceptable time for customers who are ringing up to wait?
So in April, all right, okay. 3 minutes, 5 seconds. Well, it's it's a significant improvement, Karen, from where we were, and we need to keep monitoring it, don't we? It's 3 minutes too long. Well, of course it is, but it is an average, as Daniela's just said. But I think what we need to do, Karen, is closely monitor this as well and continue to monitor it. And if you remember, the individual councils on the corporate performance reports that come forward quarterly come forward, that data is actually broken down for the individual authorities as well. So it's something quite clearly that the scrutiny committee will be challenging us on. Yep. Okay. Right. Any other, Daniela?
Is this a legacy thing? Because we've got rid of abandoned call rates in South Ribble. So is this just because it's going back to January, or?
Any more questions? Councillor Smith?
On page 23, legal and procurement restructure, it's talking there about opportunities because there's vacancies in the procurement team, and so that it's going to procurement can become fit for the purpose of the organisation. At the task group meeting of the Constitution the other day, that was part of one of the Constitution's tasks, is to actually go through procurement and see whether it's fit for purpose. I hope that the two things will tie in together so that this bit and the Constitution will also tie in nicely. It's a good opportunity, I think, to actually look at these things in the round.
I completely agree, and we'll make sure it happens, Margaret, and we'll write to, if you can speak to the monitoring officer and make sure it is picked up, yeah?
Yep.
Right, any more questions? No, right. As I think we've asked before, that it's important that all councillors on both the councils get to see this monitoring report, unless anyone believes that's not a, we do get asked a lot of questions by colleagues about the performance of shared services. So I think it'd only be appropriate that this report is shared with all councillors on both councils. You happy with that, Alistair? Yep. And we're asked to note it, so it's duly noted. Okay, agenda item 5 is the shared services future options, and Vicky again to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out future options for where we may want to look next in terms of sharing services. So at the last meeting in February, we asked the question, do you want to continue looking at shared services? And we said we're going to have a break for now while the existing shared services are consolidated and get to grips with what they've been asked to do and get their development plans underway. But we said we would continue to identify opportunistic areas for sharing, focused on the requirements outlined at point 8. So, for example, if there was a lack of capacity, if there were any temporary arrangements in place which could be formalised, if new priorities have been identified which meant the area would benefit from being shared, potential savings or a common need or potential for sharing to support one council to deliver a new function whilst maintaining performance for another. So they were the principles that we set out. We've been away and had a look at areas that could be shared, which are set out in the table at point 10 with a summary of the key considerations. So there has been more analysis in the background. It's been summarised just to provide you with the key points that have gone into considering whether the services could come forwards. So the first one there, building control has been considered, and we see that obviously further in the report. That's the one that we're proposing to take forward. Licensing has been considered, but at the moment, for a number of reasons, we're not suggesting we take that one forward. There are 2 independent licensing committees and local knowledge and policy context, obviously, around the functions. So at the moment, it's suggested that that one is maintained as a separate independent service for further consideration at a later point in time. Planning with opportunities to share skills and expertise around succession planning. Obviously, the joint local plan team is already in place across Chorley, South Ribble and Preston. But there are, again, separate planning committees and further kinds of potential for conflicts, perhaps some more complex aspects that we need to explore there so that we can make final recommendations on whether planning could be shared. And then finally, public protection. Already got a shared head of service in place, and some of the smaller functions, including pest control, are shared. We can give more consideration to bringing additional functions together, such as community safety and animal welfare, to build resilience. And that's something that we'll be looking at as we progress the reviews with that team. But that one isn't proposed for sharing right now. So the one that is considered is building control, with the points set out in the table and expanded further at point 13 and kind of and onwards in terms of the service that is currently provided and the need for resilience at the moment. The recruitment into the building control team is very challenging. I think it's been a significant period of time since we've had a kind of an in-house building control team, particularly at Chorley, and it's been provided on a contract basis or with external capacity to provide that service, but significant expertise at South Ribble and potential to sustain that through sharing the service and sharing some of the costs and some of the expertise. So the team have highlighted this one themselves through the pulse survey. It was one that was put forward as well through the previous review of management capacity. So we're suggesting that is one that is explored further. It would increase resilience, provide expertise to both teams and provide longer term sustainability with the opportunity to share staff and skills and potentially deliver a better, more improved quality of building control services for both councils, including looking at how we could maximise shared systems and software as well. So the proposal is that we take that one forward, look at a joint management arrangement and look at how we could align policy, systems and processes. At this stage, it's asking in principle if we can progress with completing a more in-depth review with a view to talking to staff, gathering further feedback and then bringing forward the proposals to this committee to then agree to go forward for formal consultation if it's recommended that we should share. So that's the proposal. If you have any questions or want us to go back and consider any of the other services, then happy to have a look at those as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. I think if you recall at the last meeting we had back in February, we did say to have a light touch review to see what the art of the possible is. But I think my understanding of the committee's decision there is we weren't necessarily looking for anything in particular. As you're saying, it's good to see that you have you've listed out some potential areas there, and obviously the only one that you're proposing to look at further is building control. Now, as it says within the report, building control is a critical function for both authorities, but it's very underutilised, it appears, and I think that's as local authorities we should be pushing our building control services. It's one of the areas I think we could look to develop significantly, and also because you can also earn revenue from it as well. Clearly, we've got some big schemes in South Ribble that are just going to commence, where we'll be looking to use Chris, our own building control, surely, and clearly there's a number of significant schemes that Chorley's working through as well. So I agree that we should look to combine building control. It seems sensible to me. It's a quasi-judicial function anyway, based upon understanding the delivery of the building regulations, etc., etc. I know there's slightly more to it than that, but it seems sensible, particularly as I say the positions the two authorities are in. And my personal view is we wouldn't look now at looking at any of the other areas any further just at the moment while we're trying to embed the first three phases that we've introduced anyway. So there's Margaret that indicated she wanted to speak, and then Alistair.
Thank you. We're entirely in agreement with this. In fact, I seem to recall some months ago we talked about it, and I said it seemed a perfect fit because they're so aligned. Are these, because as you say, it's quasi-judicial, so you almost got to continue with the regulations as they are. So therefore, they do marry very well together. I'd like to know how big the team is, or how big the teams are envisaged to be, because obviously at the moment you're, from what I gather, struggling somewhat in Chorley regarding the building control. You're using agencies, and we already have some staff here. Therefore, it would seem good idea to actually work from those expertise and obviously transfer good practice into that. But at the same time, it's going to be difficult to recruit, I would think, because it's a very specialised area. And hopefully we will, with this sort of joining together, we will be able to recruit some reasonable staff. But I'm just interested to know how many staff we do envisage having. Thank you.
Chris?
Just really to just also pick up on the point you made, Councillor Smith, around the succession planning and recruitment, because you are right, it is very difficult to recruit into building control because, as with many of the professions where you can work as equally in the private sector as in the public sector, building control within local government generally does suffer from the fact that actually if you are a qualified and experienced building control officer, you generally can earn significantly more salary and other benefits working in the private sector. Where South Ribble has already been relatively successful is in growing our own, in having apprentices and graduates and other training posts in the service that then can move into posts as and when people move on. And so actually one of the reasons for going into that shared function is to use that approach within the structure that we've got. I think in terms of numbers, on the South Ribble side, I think we have about 3 or 4 people working there. On the Chorley side, actually Chorley hasn't had a building control officer, permanent member of staff, for quite some time. They've had to use contractors and agency, but I think the team, the substantive structure, is a similar sized post. I think it's slightly smaller because Chorley works slightly differently in terms of the split of the function between professional building control officers and the administration. But I think the size of that team is around about 3 or 4 as well. So I would anticipate it's somewhere between 8 and 10 people would be in a shared team if those stay the same size.
And if it is such a small team, when you actually get to 21, when you've got all the processes to go through, I presume it won't take very long if you've only got, it's not like one of the bigger shared services where you've got a lot of people to consult. I mean, if there's only 4 here, it shouldn't take very long to actually get through that process, I would hope.
Well, it will be as thorough as they want it to be. So I would imagine we can move through it more quickly.
Good. Thank you, Vicky. Alistair, and then Alan.
Yeah, I think some of the points were just covered then by Councillor Smith. We have struggled at Chorley to both train and then retain staff directly. And that's a symptom of what Chris said before, that these people are worth quite a lot out there in the marketplace. And I think you need to be constantly bringing people in, developing them and accepting there's a loss of staff through that process, but some will stop with you. And I think that's what South Ribble's been more successful in Chorley at doing. That might be some of the management that's been in place previously. So I think there are win-wins here, really, to give greater resilience to the entire department, a bit like we've done in some of the other areas. It's a logical choice, as we discussed it before, as you mentioned, Margaret. And therefore, I think the sooner we get on with this, the better, because it will give us that greater resilience, because we will always have a churn of these kind of people, because there are not enough of them being trained across the country. But we need to keep them working in our 2 areas, because, as others have said, we're both doing lots of work, and we're both areas where people are doing lots of work on their houses as well. So therefore, it's a service that we're supplying out there to the residents. And I think people are generally more confident with council building control officers than sometimes they are with the private sector, because they don't have the same competitive edge, etc. So happy to support this, Chair.
Thanks, Alistair. Councillor Collins.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. It's just very much around picking up on something you said, and there is obviously a revenue challenge within this. And I think there's slightly missed that on the report, because the report actually says it's almost like a standstill, you know, that we share the resource and we carry on as we are. I think there's a fantastic opportunity in building control to generate revenue income, and it'd be nice to see that in the report, and going forward, whether we can sort of take that as part of it. You know, that we look to grow the service and build in the income.
Yeah, thanks. So I totally agree. So within the report, the next report that comes to us, hopefully next meeting or the meeting after, will cover off, hopefully, Margaret, all the points you raised, which shows exactly what the structure is currently and what it's being changed to with the organograms. But also, perhaps we should look at as well, Vicky, at the opportunities that are out there for building control, because there's certainly, I believe, there are, particularly with the continued changes to the building regulations, where actually building control officers can actually champion best practice as well. And there are some challenges out there now. So I totally agree. Yeah. Any other questions from anybody? Okay. So the recommendation was to basically to approve a review into shared building control as has been set out in the report. And what we would say, Vicky, is the committee's keen to see the conclusions or final recommendations as quickly as is appropriate. Yep. So I propose that. Do we have a seconder? Alistair, thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Well, the final agenda item is any urgent business that's been previously agreed, and there is none, other than for the committee to note that it's Vicky's final meeting with us tonight, and she moves on to pastures new. And I won't do what I did at Cabinet and get the role wrong and the council wrong of her new job. So yeah, I know. If you're going to get it wrong, get it all wrong. I think I promoted her and sent her to the wrong part of the country, but never mind. But Vicky, on behalf of the committee, you know, we've really enjoyed working with you and the support, and you've been critical in the successful rollout and delivery in what has been a challenging period over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly when we decided to continue with phase 2 of shared services. And phase 1 when COVID hit. So we wish you all the best in your new role, and thank you very much for what you've done. Thank you. That's the meeting closed, everyone. Thank you.